Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time we have a creepypasta of the month for December. In fact, the last one for 2014, because as you can tell, we're already in the new year, 2015. This one is called Run.exe. I know, expectations are a little drowned by it, but sit back and relax. This definitely should be quite good if it's won that title. Again, it is democracy choice, but, we're not going to hold off on anything. Let's just go right into it. This is Run.exe. The following is transcribed by Private First Class Robert Galloway, close friend of Private Alan Goodman. The following is told in Private Goodman's point of view, and is his final words before his execution at the hands of the state of Texas. With the exception of spelling corrections, it remains unedited. As I sit here waiting for my reapers to come, I've decided to tell you the truth of what's going on, so that hopefully you'll be able to understand. I'm not seeking pity nor am I wanting help, but I'm trying to stop someone else from falling under this same fate. My memory is still a little foggy, so forgive me if there are some inaccuracies in my statements compared to the news agencies, but I will tell you the truth, and nothing but the truth of my story. I have nothing to lose, and I have no regrets. I was an avid gamer in my youth. I grew up with war games such as Medal of Honor and later Call of Duty, and it was the latter that sold the idea of joining the United States Marines to me. After playing through Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare back in 2007, in 2008 I signed up at a local recruiter, and by 2009, I was boots in the ground in Iraq. In 2012, during my third tour of duty, my squad and I were caught in the explosion of a school full of children by Al-Qaeda. In the aftermath, I was sent home with a Purple Heart and nightmares that haunt me to this day. I distinctly remember the sight of one of the children nearly skinned in the explosion, and it is this child that haunted me the most. Back in the States, I was forced into treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. After I went to bed one evening, I woke up the next morning on my stoop covered in blood and mud, the first of many similar awakenings. A year after the explosion, my good friend Arnold Sanchez and I were enjoying a night of booze and burgers, and he told me about a creepypasta he had read. We passed the time in Iraq by checking out creepypastas. They're basically internet scary stories, talking about a supposedly cursed game called Run.exe. By now, I was more than familiar with the like of Sonic.exe and all of those other pitiful dot extension stories, but we decided to give it a shot. The story was buried in the bowels of the internet. He had told me that a fellow army buddy of ours had happened upon it and immediately thought of us. The story spoke of a cursed game that was rumored to drive its players insane, and provided a link to the supposed Mediafire page of the game that had been conveniently removed. Drunk, we decided to try and dig through the archives of any sign of this cursed game, but after a number of hours with little success, Arnie went home, leaving me alone with the wife, who went to bed soon after. Suffering from chronic insomnia and personally wanting to avoid the nightmares that plagued my sleep, I decided to search for the game by myself, and after an untold amount of time, I finally managed to find a working link to the game on an abandoned forum. Before installing the game, I ran a virus check on it with some military-grade software I had obtained from the Pentagon databases, but when it came up clean, I decided to just let it run. It installed pretty quickly, and upon booting it up, I was greeted with a warning telling that the game used binaural beats, subliminal messaging, and some other experimental crap to try and increase the scare factor that the game produced. I shrugged off the warning, booting up the game for the first time, and was amused to find that it had been developed on the Unity engine. The creator didn't even bother to give the damn thing a unique intro or icon. The moment after hitting the EXE, I was thrusted into a standard Unity graphic forest and a blatant ripoff of Slender the 8 Pages. I do, however, have to commend the author, as the game's music was quite the interesting blend of distorted 8-bit and heavy use of nearly subliminal audio tones that, on full blast with headphones, actually worked to put you on edge. It almost reminded me of some of the supposed music from the Misfortune.gb game that had been rumored to be scrapped, its resources cast off to the wind to become several well-known handheld titles. The game, even though maintaining very few bugs or glitches, was brutally and unfairly filled to the brim with fake difficulty. The monster hunting you was a rather graphic nude-skinned woman, the muscles on the front of her body missing to expose her skeleton, with clouded eyes and lips as blue as ice. The objective of the game was to find 7 newspaper clippings, tying into real life a bit by mentioning a well-known serial killer around my area named the Infinity Killer, who was on the loose and terrorizing the area. However, you're doing this fetch quest while being hunted by the skinned woman who spawned at a random location on the map almost instantly after you did, and left to spawn around you, while moving much faster than you mind you, making the game nearly impossible to beat without sheer luck. The world was procedurally generated, requiring an internet connection, which it apparently used to grab your approximate location via IP address and render the world given to the game by Google Maps, or something along those lines. Anyways, I was basically running around my neighborhood, including the forest just outside my house, and even saw my house itself, though I was locked out, collecting these pages and being chased by this undead maniac. Death by the girl was signified by a spray of gory shock images flashing epileptically across the screen, with a scream of a woman, volume cranked up to 11 so it's deafening and ran through some kind of program, that added a reverb and metallic effect to it, before crashing back to the desktop. Yeah, probably not a good idea for someone dealing with PTSD. Yet, 0 to 100 hours, alone, in the dark, with headphones and volume cranked to max. I managed to beat the game just as dawn was approaching and crawled in bed with my wife to find the game's horrific imagery binding with my already rampant nightmares terrorizing my sleep. The next morning, I woke up on the stoop again, covered in mud and blood, the head of a dog resting beside me, for the first time it happened, and like I always did during these horrifying moments, I hid the head, quietly slipped back inside, bleached the hell out of my clothes, and took a hot shower. Which was odd, was that as I went along with life, I began to see things out of the corner of my eye. The sign my PTSD was acting up and on the fritz. In addition to that, the horrible music that played in Run.exe was stuck in my head, and played over and over and over again, refusing to let up, and by the end of the week the song had made itself audible. I was now physically hearing it, a tulpa-like effect if you will, and from what I learned from a friend of mine who went into all that psychomental bullshit back during my service. 2 days after discovering the game, and unable to contact my buddy about my discovery, I read the papers, pursuing through the headlines and searching for any updates on the Infinity Killer, something that had become a sort of obsession of mine. At the top of the page, in glaring bold, was a red alert mentioning that the Infinity Killer's modus operandi had changed drastically. Where before he or she had gone about breaking into houses, undressing and beheading school-age girls, though not sexually assaulting them, carving an infinity symbol into their chest before fleeing the scene, he had recently been targeting young women, skinning them alive and filleting them. The only way the authorities could tell it was the same killer was that the infinity symbol was being carved into their exposed sternums. Reaching the end of the page, I cut out the article, stashing it into my battered binder where I stored the clippings, before I rolled up the paper and tossed it into the wood stove, watching it burn before going about my daily business. After reading that story, the haunting music began to torment me again. I'd gone silent and still after the last time I'd woken up outside, but it returned again, threatening to drive me mad. I made a mental note to see my psychologist ASAP, and went about my daily business. However, the tune was getting progressively louder, and that creepy girl from Run.exe was no longer appearing in my peripherals. She was now appearing in full view in the center of my vision, before flickering out with the sound of static, her decomposing milky white and pupilless eyes accusing her mouth, twisting into a wide, impossible grin with the sound of creaking leather. The hallucination was accompanied with her jaw detaching, her mouth opening wide with her jaw literally down to the base of her neck, and her hellish scream before she evaporated, disappearing with a blast of hot wind reeking of death and decay. She appeared over and over again that day, and I put it in the call with the psychologist as soon as I could, requesting an immediate visit the next day, because the pills weren't working anymore. The next morning I awoke on my porch, a gutted tomcat being my bedfellow that day. Then I cleaned up, headed to the clinic, only to find ambulances in the parking lot carrying a body bag on a gurney. I approached one of the paramedics, querying as to what happened. He told me that one of the men, my psychologist as a matter of fact, had been the latest target of an Infinity Killer, thus initiating a strange change in the murderer's preferred target demographic. Bringing on the talk of a copy of Cat Killer, or perhaps an accomplice, shaken, I just returned home, frightened to find a note buried in the mud outside my house, near where I woke up actually. It was hastily scrawled and nearly unreadable, and was stained in blood and read one word: run. Beneath the cryptic message, scrawled in bright red and looped several times over, was the infinity symbol, the signature of the killer. My heart had sank, my stomach churned, and I entered my house. The door was locked, but now the house was lit by sunlight. I was horrified to find the scrawled on the walls in blood was run. It covered the wall immediately to the left of my front door. Run, 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 run! And at the bottom of the wall of words was the infinity symbol. The killer had been in my house. There was a knock on my door, one that almost made me shit myself. And opening the door, I was greeted by a graven neighbor. A kind old lady that lived next door and was known to give my wife and I fresh-baked cakes at least once a week. She told me that my friend Arnie Sanchez had been found dead in his home earlier that morning after neighbors were complaining of a stench surrounding the property. By the state of decay, they said they had he'd been dead for a couple weeks at least, and although there wasn't much left of him, the state of the crime scene suggested he was either a complete random of the Infinity Killer, like my psychologist was, or was a sort of a new modus operandi, as he was assumed to be skinned and gutted just like my psychologist. Deeply horrified, I tried to call my wife, but she wouldn't answer. I heard a deep, garbled and metallic voice behind me, and in terror I just fled my house and into the woods, never stopping. My foot became tangled in an upturned root, and I fell to the ground, smacking my head against a rock and knocking myself out, and when I awoke, it was nighttime. I was alone in the middle of a forest, and resting by my sticky head, still tender to the touch, was a newspaper clipping, one from my collection that I had unintentionally grabbed on my way out of the house. On the Infinity Killer, the clipping blew away, and I picked myself up, dazed and disoriented. My ears ringing, my eyes burning, and my head was dull and throbbing. My vision was redded out, and I was sick to my stomach. I doubled over, dumping out the day's lunch into a leafy ground before straightening again. I picked up my binder, cast it aside, and going through it, found that 7 clippings had gone missing. Driven by an inexplicable desire to retrieve my collection, I disappeared into the forest, following the wind in search of my missing fragments. Stepping onto a clearing, a blast of hot summer wind reeking of the decay of a nearby wolf corpse blew around me, and I heard a distant, inhuman metallic scream, one I identified as female, ringing out throughout the still air. The chase was on. I charged blindly through the forest, intent on finding my collection before heading back home and locking myself away in my house. Maybe even stringing up a belt into the ceiling fan in the kitchen and end it once and for all. In my peripherals, I just saw a dark shadow move swiftly around the bushes, followed by a ghostly laugh of schoolgirls. I felt a flashback trigger, finding myself seeing the horrific scene of dead schoolchildren in the aftermath of a school explosion flashing before my eyes. As the wind morphed and distorted into the sound of heavy breathing, the inhumane, metallic screech wail ran through the air, now identifiable as words to some degree. "Run," the girl screeched. And I did not object to her suggestion. One by one, I found and retrieved my clippings, stuffing them carelessly into my binder, each retrieving, bringing on one round of ghostly chuckles and swift shadows. Sometimes even the ghostly girl and her hanging jaw leaping out of the forest and charging into my face with that inhuman howl before she evaporated into shadowy mist inches before my face. Finding the last page, I turned a complete 180 and began sprinting back to my house. Hearing the sound of a creature chasing me relentlessly from close behind, hearing the heavy, labored breathing of a woman, liquid and dead, sprinting after me, I did not turn to look as she came closer and closer to me. Soon my house was in view, a dark, almost haunted silhouette compared to the street lamps just outside. I raced forward into the door I had left open, slamming it shut, swiftly bolting it before racing upstairs, locking myself inside my room. I could hear her angry snarls, hear the sound of pounding on the back door. She was furious, and she was bashing down my door. The house shook, and a loud bang told me that she had torn down my back door. And I could hear frantic stomping across the house and upstairs. Her laughter, ghostly and childlike and dead, was omnipresent, swirling around me, and I opened my dresser, revealing a blood-stained combat knife. I clenched it tightly in my hands, my back against the wall, eyes bugging out as I watched my bedroom door shake and warp, with their pounding thuds and angry, animal-like screams. Soon, the pounding had died down, and I had held my breath as the world was overcome with eerie silence. Was she gone? The door burst open again then, and I was horrified to find the woman standing there in the doorway, completely nude. Her hair was stringy and full of clumps of dirt and soil. She'd been skinned, and the muscles on her front half had been completely removed, revealing the clean white bone of her skeleton. I watched her heart beat and pulsate with life, her intestines somehow remaining in place, churning and rolling in her gut with her motions as she approached me. The skull of her skinned face was shiny and smooth, her brain case surgically removed to reveal the gray matter within, and her eyes were milky white orbs, rotting within her dead eye sockets. Her lips, as blue as ice, were still attached, and she grinned, the remaining muscles of her jaw creaking like ancient leather as she approached me. Her breathing heavy and liquid, the sound of muffled crying emitted from her, even though she bore a homicidal and maniacal expression, and her jaw detached, her mouth opening wide as she hissed like a cat, charging towards me at impossible speeds. She pounced upon me, her cold, slimy fingers reaching their way into my mouth and jaw, prying the two apart. I screamed, loud as ever, and remembering my knife, thrusting the blade deep into her pulsating heart, and upon the blade penetrating the flesh, her vicious, cannibalistic glare became one of shock and terror, her hissing stifled into a dog's whine of death. And she backed away, clutching at the blade buried in her chest, trying to remove it. She fell forward then, and I, terrified, ran to her side, grabbing my knife and stabbing repeatedly, carving the infinity symbol into her sternum. Compelled to trap her spirit within her body with that mark, I called the police, crying for help, and I stumbled into a corner, rocking myself as the horror I had experienced replayed over and over again. And after what seemed like hours, several ununiformed officers entered my house, shining their flashlight in my eyes. With tears and an inaudible groan of joy, I leaped towards them, waiting to embrace them for rescuing me from that hell. They swore. They cried out, and I felt the butt of an assault rifle bash up against my forehead. Stunned at their betrayal, I tried to pick myself up before they piled onto me, and I felt a sharp prick of a needle stab into my neck before everything had become numb and dark. When next I awoke, I was in a padded cell, bound in a straitjacket. I called to nobody, crying for help and demanding an explanation for my imprisonment, but from there the days bleed onto one another, and I could not distinguish one day from the next during my sedated stay. Today I sit here on death row, awaiting my executioners for reasons unknown. I hear them approaching. I know my time is near. They drag me across the prison, and I struggle to write my memoirs. They bind me into a cold chair. My head is pressed to the back of it, and I could not see near the bottom of the page, and I can only hope that my message is readable. They tell me that they found me in my bedroom, covered in blood, the skinned corpse of my wife, a fresh kill lying at my feet. They tell me that when they entered, they found me carving the infinity symbol into her sternum with my combat knife. They tell me I'm the killer, that I'm responsible for the murder of 50 girls and a dozen women, as well as my best friend and my psychologist. They tell me that it's time for me to pay for my crimes. I hear the buzzing of a generator. It's becoming hard to write as my muscles refuse to cooperate. The woman, the demon woman, stands before me, grinning widely, her muscles creaking like leather. I smile, because she's transparent, and as the first painful bolt of electricity goes through my body, nearly crippling in its pain, her jaw detaches, and she screams before dissipating into mist. Finally, I can...
Well, that was honestly something. Actually surpassed my expectations. I mean, first of all, I heard Call of Duty, so automatically, as I was reading it, my expectations died, but, going through more and more of it, it's not, you never should judge a book by the cover. So it really did match my expectations. And if you didn't catch through my horrible voice acting towards the end, there was an electrocution. But, all in all, I gotta say it's a very good tale. Now, starting off, it's very different compared to other gaming creepypastas. It feels a lot more personal to me, which is really awesome. I've been yearning for that, and I've seen it rarely happen to this degree. Now, the story has a unique way of starting. Really, it's a soldier who gamed on war games, joined the military, which honestly is, unfortunately realistic. Kids do think that it is just a game, and so they therefore go into it, but that's a whole nother topic. And honestly, let's hope that kill streak for them runs for a long time. But this totally has a unique acquisition concept, and the nods to other creepypastas such as Misfortune.gb were really well done. And I like seeing them because as a protagonist that is interested in creepypastas like I like to see that they can reference other things, because I constantly do it too, and I like to see that because, again, it just brings that personal note even further out. And contextually, it fits with the whole narrative. Now, I thought it was kind of Grand Theft Auto 5 with the Infinity Killer, but, using Slender instead, and actually making that scary was quite the challenge to me. We've all seen Slender, and it really isn't that fearful, but this actually takes that and puts it into a scary concept, and because it was paced well, I could really sit myself in that intense scenario. And really, it was good, and definitely is in the Premier League of gaming creepypastas, and just creepypastas in general. Run.exe is really good. And the game's phenomenon and operations were, technically feasible. There was nothing out of the ordinary, like no creepy, blood eyes coming out of the, ROM hacks or anything crazy like that. And the writing, with your personal note, was again a very amazing touch. In the end, what would you rate this, and what would you change to make it better? This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. So stay ordinary. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.